Well, hi everybody. How are you today? We're continuing our study on Revelation, and we are working through probably one of the most important chapters of Revelation, Revelation 13. And when you hear today's study, I really do hope that you learned something new in this, because I did, and it's exciting what I found. And that's why I titled this, Are We Losing Our Civil Liberties? The Ominous Warning of Revelation 13, because you will see in the description of these beasts that John mentions, you will see the beast that exists today. And I want you to let me know when we're done with the video. I want you to give me your thoughts, give me your ideas on this. This is fascinating. But anyway, to better understand this prophetic passage, we're going to take a look into the past, about 6 centuries before this was written. And I'm talking about the prophet Daniel. We're going to look at what he said when he was exiled in Babylon. He actually received a series of visions that perfectly illustrated the entirety of global history. And when you place Daniel chapter 7 and Revelation 13 together, they kind of lock together like a puzzle. And it gives us a much more detailed picture of what we're looking at here. And I liken it to two men looking at the same mountain, right? They both see the same mountain, but they have very different perspectives, and they can give us more details from these different perspectives. So let's look at how John describes this empire. He says, "And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, and with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority." So if you look at this, really, there are two similarities here between John and Daniel. The point of origin of this beast, okay? That's what I want to draw attention to, is the fact that this beast is described as rising out of the sea, okay? Daniel 7 specifies that the 4 winds of heaven, they churn the great sea. And what the 4 winds of heaven are is they're north, south, east, and west, meaning they're everywhere, okay? This is global, and it symbolizes God's global control over this great sea. All right, the sea represents global turbulence and restlessness that occurs across the Gentile world. So by detailing that the winds from every direction are actively stirring the waters, Daniel and John are revealing something very important about the state of the world at the period of time that this beast rises. And that is that this final global empire is going to be birthed out of worldwide crisis and distress. Okay, and you can see that taking shape right now. Our world is being ripped apart and torn down, isn't it? Everything that was a certain way is now being torn apart. So, as a matter of fact, though, and this is something that got my attention about this, is if you look at human history, New World orders, they were never established during times of peace, were they? They were created. These New World orders were created in the aftermath or as a response to a global catastrophe. And, you know, when I think about this at my age, and probably most of you think the same way too, I'm reminded of a period of time following World War II, right? Prior to 1939, global power was actually fragmented. And this World War II, it left Europe broke and in ruins. So out of this chaotic sea that, the world was in at that time, a new political landscape actually emerged, and it occurred practically overnight, didn't it? And this actually restructured our entire world. Very interesting. So world leaders, out of the chaos, they actually united to build stability and foster peace. They said never again, right? But what they did was they created centralized global governance through the United Nations in 1945. And during the exact same time is when the Bretton Woods Conference created a new economic order by establishing the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So that is where, that is how those entities were birthed, right? That is likely, I think, the point that we're at in the world now, okay? Being torn down so it can be built back up in his likeness so that he can control it, right? This empire is described as having 10 horns and 10 diadems and 7 heads with blasphemous names. That's how John describes it. And when we look at the original Greek text here, it gives us really important details about this final superpower. First, look at the 10 horns with 10 diadems. In English, we often use one generic word for crown, right? But in the Greek, they specifically use 2 different words. The first word is Stephanos, which is a laurel wreath representing a victor's crown of honor or an athletic reward. All right, and this is actually how the Antichrist is depicted in Revelation 6:2. He comes in and he has this laurel wreath on. Instead, though, in Revelation 13, John, he makes a very clear distinction here by using a different word for a crown, which is diadema. And it refers to an imperial crown, which is different because it's worn by authoritarian monarchs. So this distinction is really fascinating to me because, you might think, or anyone might think that, or expect that John would use the same term to describe the Antichrist, right? But he didn't. In chapter 6, he didn't use this same word. So is it because the Antichrist is not initially given the honor of royalty? Is it because he's not a global dictator as of yet when he first enters the scene, that he wins this contest, so to speak, like a political thing? I don't really know, but there is a distinction here. So while the dragon in Revelation 12 wore these crowns on his head, this beast wears them on its horns, okay? The horns actually represent power and individual kings. So this distinction actually shows us that the power of the beast is going to be divided among 10 rulers, which, if we remember, it does add that these kings will hand their power over to him. So second, consider the 7 heads with blasphemous names. In Scripture, blasphemy means to slander God by arrogantly stealing the glory, names, and praise that belong solely to God. So it doesn't look like we think, just like worship, okay? People don't even recognize blasphemy. They don't recognize what worship looks like, do they? But, and if you have spiritual eyes, you can generally identify these things. So the way the original Greek text is written here shows us that these insulting anti-God names are physically marked right onto the beast's heads, okay? And why would they be marked right onto his heads? Because it represents how he thinks and his authority, see? So And isn't it true? Isn't it true? So it's comparing this future ruler to ancient Roman emperors, really, is what it sounds like Domitian, right? These Roman emperors actually forced people to call them Lord and God, especially Domitian. He was pretty bad. The original language, though, shows us that this final system will force people to worship it, taking praise that belongs only to the Lord. So, what that's going to look like, I'm not really sure. But it's not going to be like people expect, though. So you need to have eyes to see, right? Eyes to see and ears to hear, as the Lord says. But in verse 2, John looks backward through history. He lists Daniel's beast in reverse chronological order: the leopard, the bear, and the lion. The Greek word for beast here is therion, meaning a dangerous, untamed, venomous predator. So the beast is literally a predator, right? And it indicates to me that this final system will lack empathy, and they will seek to devour, which is true to Satan's nature, isn't it? But, when you look too at the actual anatomy of the beast, John describes the main body of the final beast as being similar to a leopard. In Daniel 7:6, the leopard represents ancient Greece under Alexander the Great. Okay, so my question is why would this beast be referred to as having the main body of a leopard? And what I found was historians and ancient texts actually described the rise of Alexander the Great. They compared him to a leopard in their descriptions. So Bible prophecy symbolized his empire too as a four-winged, four-headed leopard. And when you look at how Alexander actually built his power, this imagery perfectly illustrates what took place, which is astonishing to me, Think about a leopard for a minute here. It's a kind of ambush predator, and it's defined by its speed and agility. So Alexander, he did not wage wars slowly. He wasn't a slow war type of fella. So he and his armies actually marched thousands of miles across rugged terrain, moving so quickly that they repeatedly caught the massive Persian army off guard. On the battlefield, he used these tight infantry lines to pin his enemies down. Then he would personally lead a speedy cavalry to charge and strike like a pouncing predator. So he was very much a leopard. But, the thing is a leopard is also defined by its spots. So not only is a leopard fast and agile, but their spots, they kind of blend seamlessly into the surrounding environment. That's the idea. And this mirrors Alexander's incredible political and military adaptability. So this beast is going to have this ability to adapt, right? And when he faced traditional armies, Alexander, he used traditional tactics. When he faced guerrilla warfare in Central Asia, he immediately broke his forces into small, flexible units. So he adapted militarily, just like the United States does. We have different types of military. We have them in different places, and we do it differently based on the situation, don't we? But politically speaking, Alexander was also a chameleon. He was someone who could change to fit any narrative. So instead of destroying the cultures he conquered, what he did was he adapted their customs, He wore Persian royal robes, and he accepted Egyptian religious titles. And it made it so much easier for him to rule these diverse populations, because it prevented rebellion, really is what it did, because he appeared to be one of them. Okay? And that's what they do. They try to, appear to be one of you. So finally, there is a stranger part of the metaphor, a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. While Alexander's charisma and ruthlessness held his empire together during his rapid success, he failed to build a strong foundation. And that was the problem with him, because he moved so quickly and he conquered so quickly. He never actually took the time to build a stable political institutions, And when he died suddenly at age 32, his kingdom, it fractured almost overnight. Just like the 4-headed beast of prophecy, his kingdom was instantly split into 4 separate regions and ruled by 4 generals. Ultimately, Alexander, he became powerful because he moved with the speed of a winged leopard, though, and he adapted with the stealth of its spots. And he burned out so quickly that his empire broke into these 4 pieces before the dust of his conquest could even settle. So you can see there the importance of the leopard and how we really do kind of fit, the leopard analogy, don't we? But the second part of this beast is its feet, okay? Its feet specifically. Its feet are like a bear's feet, okay? In Daniel 7:5, the Medo-Persian Empire is symbolized by a bear. The feet actually represent immense crushing and stable structural foundation of this empire. So the imagery actually reflects how Persia used its military and governing system, such as the satrapy system, okay? The king's eyes and the elite immortals, okay? So they used these things to firmly grasp a large multi-ethnic territory rather than relying only on rapid conquest. So, it wasn't just the power of their military. The Medo-Persian Empire didn't just conquer through brute force. They built a massive, unstoppable political machine. So you gotta, like we've said before in other videos, you gotta have all these things in place to be an effective conqueror, to have an effective global kingdom, don't you? So the Medo-Persian Empire, their system really, to me, when I looked at this, it was shockingly similar to the United States government. I mean, I was really struck by this. And I didn't know this. So to rule an empire stretching across 3 continents, King Darius divided his land into provinces called satrapies, okay? Think of it exactly like the United States being split into 50 individual states, right? That's essentially what it was. Each province was run by a governor called a satrap, who managed local laws and collected taxes just like a modern-day American governor. It's the same thing. And what they did to prevent rebellions, Persia allowed these regions to keep their own languages and traditions and religions. So they each had what they wanted, so to speak, in those areas. And it was their ancient version kind of the 10th Amendment, giving local areas control over their own culture, okay? We kind of have this set up in the world today, and even in the United States, there's certain areas, we have certain cultures, and but to keep the central government in charge, Persia used a system of checks and balances similar to our separation of powers, very similar. So Darius split local power completely in half. The governor ran civilian businesses, but a completely separate commander ran the local army. So neither one could plot a rebellion, you see, because they both reported independently to the king. They weren't combined powers. So it's highly comparable to how the U.S. federal government can step in and federalize a state's National Guard if a local leader abuses power. You see, the government, the federal government, maintains its power in this way. So finally, the emperor kept everyone in line using a secret intelligence network called the King's Eyes and Ears. Now, this is going to sound very similar to what you see going on today. These independent inspectors would show up announced to audit books and stop corruption, right? And really what it was it functioned very much like the Department of Justice is supposed to, I stress is supposed to today, right? And what's the point here with this bear? What's the point? The point is that this empire has a strong and powerful foundation. It has strong and powerful feet. And that strong and powerful foundation it is centralized control, right? Or a powerful government system like ours, okay? And really when you look, I mean, does the United States meet the criteria that John is laying out here? It sure sounds it, doesn't it? Even though this is going to be a global thing. I mean, we have all of these aspects in our world today, but in our country today. But this massive Persian federal system was held together and connected by roadways called the Royal Road. Okay? These roads were actually designed for national defense and rapid deployment. All right? It was 1,600 mile highway system combined with a lightning fast postal network that could deploy an army in days. And this is the exact concept that inspired America's interstate highway system, which was built so our military could move troops rapidly across state lines during a crisis. When diplomacy failed, the empire deployed its elite 10,000-man army known as the Immortals, backed by specialized soldiers drafted from conquered lands. So this setup mirrors the U.S. military, which mainly relies on an active duty federal force, backed by state-level assets like the National Guard. You see how that is? I mean, isn't that crazy? The similarities? But despite all of these shocking similarities, okay, there are some major differences between our two systems, at least for now, okay? But unfortunately, I think that we're moving in the wrong direction, and we could be aligning perfectly with this. But for now, our power system is supposed to be driven from the bottom up by we, the people, right? We elect our leaders and we hold them accountable through something called voting, which is something that they're trying to, I believe they're trying to take our voting rights away. In contrast, power in the Persian Empire flowed strictly from the top down, which is exactly what the Antichrist will do and is attempting to do at this very moment. The emperor ruled with absolute authority, while an American governor answers to state voters and cannot be fired by the president, which, you know, a Persian governor served entirely at the whim of the king and could be executed instantly, okay? And this is really the exact kind of power that the beast craves, doesn't he? He craves this kind of power. He'd like to get rid of these governors that he doesn't like. And finally, while Persia offered great religious freedom for its time, civil liberties did not exist. And I do think we are moving in the wrong direction on this as well. Its people had zero free speech, zero voting rights, and absolutely no way to challenge the king. So why, so with so many similarities, all right, we need to see what's going on. We need to see this for what it is, But it left me also to ask the question, really, after looking at all of these similarities and the things in our headlines today and the news that we see, are we actually on the verge of losing our civil liberties and our ability to hold public officials accountable? Are we losing that? Because it sure does appear it, doesn't it? With all of these things that they're trying to do with voting, with all of these things that they're, all of these laws they're trying to implement and the way they're trying to change things. And it's like they're trying to take the power from the people and consolidate it into one head. But anyway, and the final component of this kingdom is the mouth of a lion. And this is a really big one, right? And I don't know how many of you watch Brother Paul's channel, but every time I think of the mouth of a lion, I think of Brother Paul because he has mentioned it so many times. And it's because the beast has the mouth of a lion, just like Babylon, right? The Babylonian Empire earned this description because the mouth represents how a kingdom asserts its power, okay? It is how it asserts its power. And that's, we can't forget there's a lot of power in speech. There's a lot of power in the tongue, isn't there? And really, the mouth has the same level of power as any lethal weapon does. So sticks and stones is not true, okay? With authority, it can declare fierce decrees and consume its rivals. The mouth exercises political authority and it initiates military conquest to devour its enemies. All traits mirrored by a dominant predator, right? So centuries after the first law of Mesopotamia were written, King Nebuchadnezzar turned Babylon into a dictatorship with the power to destroy entire nations. When the king of Babylon spoke, his word carried total authority, which is something I know someone would like to have at this point in time, right? His voice alone led to the total destruction of Jerusalem and the forced exile of entire populations. And, really what it was is it was a top-down authority, and it was backed by a devouring military force acting as the empire's ultimate weapon, just as he's seeking today. So Babylon wasn't created by slow, steady expansion, was it? It was created by exercising fierce predatory power. It quickly consumed the Assyrian Empire, seizing neighboring lands. And while it did that, you know what else it did? It drained their wealth and their resources. So this is exactly what we see happening in our world today, right? He's trying to pillage the world of their natural resources and gain control and power over them. So essentially, Babylon used its military machine and trade routes to strip conquered nations of everything valuable. So instead of letting local lands keep their resources, right? The empire consumed their gold, their silver, their crops, and even their most skilled craftsmen, dragging them all back to one central location, the capital city. What does that sound like? Tell me it's not the same thing. I mean, doesn't it though? And you'll never guess what they did with all of these riches. All of those stolen riches, they were funneled directly into Babylon to fund massive building projects, luxury palaces, and grand temples, maybe even ballrooms, right? So hoarding all of the wealth at the center of the empire made this man unimaginably wealthy while leaving these surrounding nations empty and broken. They lost everything. So in today's world, this might look a little bit different. More like maybe controlling the rich and powerful men of the world, right? The ones who own tech companies, oil companies, investment companies, owning, the cryptocurrency that's backed by the US dollar, I don't know. And then, defeating nations and maybe pillaging, their oil and their natural resources. So when Revelation says this end time beast has the mouth of a lion, this is the kind of devouring dictatorial power it's talking about, okay? Does he have the mouth of a lion? Yep, sure does. So this fierce identity was displayed throughout the empire, even in its architecture. Nebuchadnezzar II, he lined the famous Ishtar Gate in processional way with 120 vibrant, roaring brick lions. Okay? And, this symbolism of a fierce lion was actually more about more than just power, right? It also represented the sacred animal of Ishtar, the goddess of warfare, meaning the king was intentionally honoring military might. When a foreign diplomat visited the capital, they were forced to literally and symbolically walk into the open jaws of a lion. Now, ours tends to honor the god of war with his gold, right? With money. Everyone's money. Not his money, though. And where does it get its strength here? The text says the dragon gave him his power. So this is a literal transaction. Satan actually delegates his supreme earthly power to a human agent, handing over his throne to this man. He gives the beast great authority and global dominion. So the empire is going to have everything it needs to enforce its evil agenda on a global scale, right? It is going to have a great government system. It is going to have military power and might. It's going to have wealth. It's going to have all of these things, right? This evil coalition and satanic authority peaks in verse 3 with an event that shocks the world. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed this beast. So the beast recovery kind of acts as a deceptive supernatural counterfeit of Christ's resurrection. John uses actually the same Greek phrasing for slaughter that he used to describe Jesus as a slain lamb in Revelation 5:6. By utilizing the Greek terms used for miraculous healing and blind wonder, the text actually reveals that a supernatural global deception takes place here. And it's going to encourage people to worship the beast. So now a massive question, all right, that standard Bible scholars ask here is this a revived empire or an individual man? That's the question. And honestly, the answer is probably both. The revived empire view argues the wound was given to a kingdom, right? And so it is a revival of the Roman Empire. This Roman Empire was once struck and it died, but a fragment remained, right? And it is reborn. It is recreated. So Um, and then there are those that believe that this represents the Antichrist, right? Um, because later on, the text actually uses personal pronouns like he and him. And they also note that the text says the beast was wounded by the sword and yet lived. So they believe the Antichrist will survive an assassination attempt, right? And in my perspective, I think that the reality is that the most complete view is both. Okay. In ancient history, an empire was always personified by its king, just as Nebuchadnezzar was Babylon. And prophecy also, too, it has a dual fulfillment. And we all know that. So I think that the fatal wound likely strikes both a man and this government system. So the miraculous event will undoubtedly cause, though, the conditions described in verse 4 and 5. And it says, and they worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? And the beast was given a mouth, uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. So the original Greek text here gives us some important details about the nature of this submission. Okay, the word used here, the Greek word used here, historically, this term literally meant to fall upon one's knees, to bow low or touch the forehead to the ground. So this is, John is really painting a portrait of complete groveling capitulation here. Not just a kind of casual political agreement. It's an act of absolute submission that people will surrender their personal autonomy to satanic power. And, really this blind devotion gives rise to a dark parody of Old Testament worship, where God's people once sang, who is like you, O Lord, in Exodus 15:11. The world is now crying out, who is like the beast? You see how he seeks those things that are God's. He tries to mimic the Lord. And this replaces the supremacy of God, really is what it does, with the military and political power of a demonic system that will exercise the power of his mouth and use psychological warfare, okay? He will use the power of his mouth, and he will use psychological warfare. Scripture reveals that he speaks haughty and blasphemous words, doesn't it? Rather than relying solely on physical strength, solely on his physical weapons and military, the Antichrist uses weaponized rhetoric and massive propaganda campaigns, as we have seen him do over however many years now we've seen this, right? Remember, even at the height of this deception, the beast will be controlled, though. Okay, he's not just free to do whatever he wants, because God will control him. The Lord has the last say, The text states that his authority was given. It was given using a Greek verb that describes exercising that power and meaning to act without restraint. Okay, but the Lord can restrain him as much as he chooses, right? And this period of time that he will act in this way will be for 3.5 years, right? So he's going to actually allow the beast to execute his plans before facing final judgment. And once the beast actually secures his global monopoly, which is what he's working on doing right now, his arrogant heart will act on his hate. In verses 6 and 7, it says, it opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling. That is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. and authority was given over to every tribe and people and language and nation. So in verse 6, the Greek verb used to describe to tabernacle implies that those who blasphemed, that those who are blasphemed by the beast are identified with God's dwelling place, right? So this specific verb appears 5 times in the New Testament. It's in John 1:14, Revelation 7:15, 12:12, 13:6, and 21:3. Okay? And each time it is used, it expresses God's intimate presence with his people. So it's similar to Israel's tabernacle in the wilderness. It communicates that the Lord chooses to reside among those he redeems. He chooses to. Okay? Because of this, the redeemed are spiritually protected from the Antichrist rhetoric. Okay? When the beast realizes he cannot touch our souls, he will attack us in other ways. And that's exactly what he does, doesn't he? He slanders us and he uses other abusive spiritual tactics against God's people. In this case, though, he will physically kill God's people. Verse 7 contains a sobering irony. The text says that the beast was allowed to wage war against the saints. So he was allowed to wage war against the saints, becoming this borderless war against God's people, likely due to what? What do you think he's so mad about? Their opposition. They refuse to worship him. They oppose him, and he hates it. He hates it, right? So it specifically notes that he was allowed to conquer them. So to human eyes, it's going to look like the church is completely losing, right? As we face martyrdom. Or maybe we won't be here, you know. But if we are here, we will face martyrdom. But throughout Revelation, this exact same word for conquer is used to describe how believers defeat Satan, right? By refusing to compromise their faith. That's exactly how. Even to the point of death, the saints actually never lose. We never lose, even to the point of death. So, you know, whether these are people that come to know the Lord after, you know, if the Lord takes us out sooner, you know, an earlier period, or whether, you know, we're wrong and we're still here, these believers will be martyred and it will appear that they're losing. But the truth is they will be achieving true spiritual victory over this beast through their deaths. It will be through their deaths, just as Jesus did, right? And, you know, we need to keep in mind that how we win ultimately is by staying faithful to the end, right? We have to endure to the end. That's the idea here. So the exact same path that Jesus took on the cross. He endured to the end. And so this comes full circle, so to speak. So finally, John closes this vision in verse 8 through 10 by drawing a permanent line between two groups of people, all right? And all who dwell on the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. So John draws this dividing line right here. He says, everyone whose name is not written in the Lamb's book of life will be deceived by the beast, while true believers are eternally saved, okay? No matter what, the enemy can take your life, but he cannot have your soul. Our soul is eternal. It's eternal in Christ. So then comes the command, right? Regarding captivity and the sword, which has two two very important meanings here. First, it is a call for believers to peacefully endure while accepting whatever trial the Lord allows. We have to endure peacefully. We have to learn how to stand through these trials in a godly way and represent the Lord through our trials, no matter what comes. So, and also, it's a promise of divine justice, isn't it? It tells the world that the tyrants and the oppressors who put people in chains today, they will face God's judgment tomorrow. They will. God will eventually judge these people. Rest assured. So remember, I think this is the most important thing here. Remember, no matter how bad it gets, okay, that there will come a day, all right, when the Lord will judge them. This will end. This will stop. And evil will finally be destroyed. So this passage is a warning that spiritual and cultural tribulation, it's going to come for sure. There's no doubt. And instead of fighting back with anger or worldly weapons, all right, our true victory is going to be found standing firm and trusting the Lord and refusing to compromise. The final call for endurance and faith of the saints reminds us that true spiritual strength is not measured by physical survival, but by unyielding loyalty to Christ. We have to endure to the end, right? Endure. We have to remain faithful to our groom. That's the idea. So I want to thank you guys for joining me today in this study. And I know it was a long one. I'm really sorry, but I couldn't make it any shorter. There was too much in it. But if this helped you see these passages in a new light, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. And I want you too to share your comments below, because I'd love to hear your perspectives on these things. And I will see you guys at the end of the week. Bye.